Alright guys, so in the last video we set up our Redux store and also our root reducer, which is the index.js file inside the reducers folder. Now we're going to create our alert reducer. We're also going to look at actions and types. Alright, so inside reducers, let's create a file, and I'm going to call this alert.js. And we want to bring this into our root reducer, into index.js. So I'm going to import, and let's say alert from, and just /alert, and then we just want to add that to this object that we pass into combine reducers. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that. Now in alert.js, this is going to be our reducer, which is just a function that takes in a piece of state, okay, any state that has to do with alerts, and an action. Okay, an action is going to get dispatched from an actions file, which is a little weird, but I'll try to explain it as we move along. Now we're going to have an initial state. Okay, so this just pertains to alerts, and the initial state is going to be an empty array. Now what alerts are going to look like, they're going to be objects in this array that will have an ID, they'll have a message, so something like I don't know, please log in or something like that, and then an alert type, which would be something like success or error. That way in our alert component we can look at this and we can decide what color we want it to be, red for alert for errors and green for success. So this will just be an array of objects of these. Okay, but the initial state will just be an empty array. So as far as the function, we want to make sure we export it as default. So export default function, and like I said, it's going to take in the state, which by default is the initial state, and an action. Okay, now this action is going to contain two things. Well, one mandatory thing, which is going to be a type, and then a payload, which will be the data. Okay, and sometimes you might not have any data. You might just call an action type, but no data. So the type is what we need to evaluate, and we're going to do that with a switch statement. So we're going to say switch, and then action is an object, and it should have a type attached to it, and we want to evaluate that by cases. Now the types, we could put a string here. For instance, we're going to have set alert as a type. Now common convention is to use variables or constants for types, and that's what we're going to do. So inside our source folder, I'm going to create a folder called actions, and this is where all of our action files will go, and that's where we make like HTTP requests and stuff like that. But also we're going to have a file in here called types.js that's going to hold all of our variables, all of our constants, I should say. Some people will call this file constants.js, but I'm going to go ahead and just export const set alert, and then just simply set it to a string of set alert. Now this might seem a little weird, I know it did to me at first, but the reason for it is if we need to change this for some reason, we can just change it here, because you might use this in a lot of different places, so we can just change it here. Also, it gives you a centralized file of all your types, so you can see, you know, all your action types in one place. So we're going to have set alert, we're also going to have remove alert. Okay, so we'll say remove alert here, and we'll save that, and then I'm going to go back into our reducer here and just bring those in. So let's say const set alert and remove alert, and we want to import, or I'm sorry, what am I doing here? We want to set we want to import these, not const. So import those from, we want to go up one level into actions, and then we want types. All right, so now for the case, we're not going to use quotes because we're using this variable, this set alert. Okay, we just want to put a colon, this is just a JavaScript switch. Now, depending on the type, we need to decide what we want to send down as far as state. So we need to return something here, and we're going to return for the state an array because remember the case or the action here, it's set alert. So we're adding an alert. Now, this is immutable. State is immutable, so we have to include any other state that's already there. So we're going to use the spread operator and say state, which is this right here. So if there's already an alert in there, we want to make sure that we just basically copy it and then add our alert, our new alert. And we can do that by just saying action, and then we'll have the data inside of a payload. Okay, we'll call it payload. You might see it called something else with some developers, but I always like to send the data as payload. Okay, and this payload will have like a message, a .message, a .id, and an alert type like I showed you earlier. All right, so we'll return that. That will set a new alert or add a new alert to the array. Just put a semicolon there. And then as far as remove alert, what we want to do there is remove a specific alert by its ID. So I'm going to return the state, which is the array, and I want to filter through the alerts because we only want to remove a specific alert. We're going to send along an ID. So I'm going to use filter and say for each alert, I want to check to see if the alert ID is not equal to the payload. Now, the payload in this case is going to be just the ID. The payload can be whatever we want, and this will make more sense when you see the actions file we create when we actually dispatch these. Okay, now in addition to these, we just want a default. So the default, we're just going to return the state like that. Okay, so every reducer we create is going to have a default case of just return state. Now, instead of, and this should be action.payload, but instead of using action.payload, action.type, let's just destructure up here, and let's pull out the type and the payload from action. So that way we can actually get rid of that. We can get rid of that, this action here, and we can get rid of this. All right, so hopefully this makes sense. We dispatch this type, this set alert, and we return the array with the payload, with the new alert, and remove is going to filter through, and it's going to return all alerts except for the one that matches the payload. All right, so let's go ahead and create an action file. So inside our folder called actions, I'm going to create a file called alert.js. And inside here, we're going to import set alert and remove alert because we're going to dispatch these, which will call the case that we just put in the reducer. So remove alert. And that's going to be from, and types is in the same folder, so just .types. And then let's do export const, and let's say set alert. And these are going to be arrow functions. Now, I want to be able to dispatch more than one action from, or I should say action type from this function right here. So we have something called dispatch that we can add. So we can do our parameters, and then we can do an arrow dispatch and then another arrow with the function body, and we're able to do this because of that thunk middleware. All right, now this is going to take in a few things. It's going to take in the message, it's going to take in the alert type. All right, for now. Now, remember what I told you an alert's going to look like. It'll have an ID, it'll have a message, and an alert type. Now, for the ID, we want to randomly generate this. So we could do this with vanilla JavaScript, but what I'm going to do is just install a package called UUID that will just give us a universal ID on the fly. So I'm just going to open up my terminal real quick and cd into client, and I'm going to npm install UUID. I knew there was something I forgot when we installed the initial dependencies. Okay, so all right, so that's installed. So now up here, I'm going to import UUID from UUID. And then let's create a variable here called ID. And the way that we can get a random universal ID is with UUID dot, and there's different versions. We're using version 4. Okay, so that will give us just this random long string. And then we want to call that set alert that's in our reducer right here. Okay, so the way that we do that is we can use dispatch. So we can say dispatch, and we're going to put an object in here. We want to set the type to set alert. So that's how it's going to resolve the type here. So since we're dispatching this is what's going to happen now. It needs the payload, so we need to send along a payload. So let's say payload, and the payload is going to be whatever message is passed in, whatever alert type is passed in, and then the ID. Okay. And I think we should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, in the next video, we're going to create an alert component that's actually going to interact with this. We're going to have an we're going to call this action from the component, and then this is going to get dispatched, and then this state will get passed down to the component. All right, so we're going to do that in the next video.